The Loki Sword by Angus Donald. Fireborn Book 3. Read by Ade Dimberline. Prologue. The Taste of Death. Tor watched her brother Bjarki leap over the barricade of mud, shields, and ancient stones in a single bound, and hurtle down the hill towards the foe. His comrades were slower getting past the obstacles, but not much. There were not many more than a score of fighters by then, but they all streamed down the slope in a tight, howling pack, heading straight for the Black Cloak camping ground. The warriors were screaming their war cries as they charged, but Bjarki had now fallen silent, and was racing away ahead of the field with his lofted sword seeming to glow blood red in the dying light of the day. Tor was roughly in the middle of the swarm, toting shield and spear. She knew that skinny old Valtyr, also armed with a spear, was stumbling along disjointly only a few paces behind her. Now they were only 200 yards from the Christian lines, and she heard the trumpets of the Blackcloaks sounding the alarm, and saw the first units of troops, half a cune at least, who had been that night sentries, forming up calmly to block their path. These scalares were the best troops in Francia, perhaps in the whole Middle Realm, and they could not be caught napping, even by this most unorthodox of attacks. A few hundred paces away now, and the dismounted Blackcloaks had formed a fine, solid wall, a double line of troopers, 40 of them, shields locked, helmeted heads tucked in tight, bristling with steel spear points. And Bjarki was charging heedlessly towards the center of them. 70 paces away now. "Archers!" yelled Tor. "Archers, halt! Thin their middle! Thin it now!" She skidded to a stop and was glad to see her 4 bowmen too halt beside her, all panting hard from the run. They drew out arrows, knocked, pulled back the string, and loosed at a fat line of Blackcloaks, aiming for the very center of the shield wall. One of the men shot too long, his shaft sailing high over the heads of the enemy. Another shot wide, his arrow smacking into the shield of the Frank on the center left of the line. But the third drew, loosed, and shot true, and so did the fourth. Their twin arrows hissed lethally into the center of the enemy shield wall and caused a ripple of displacement as the Frank fell. "The middle! Target the very center of the shield wall!" yelled Tor. All 4 archers plucked up a second arrow and loosed again, and struck. Just a shaved heartbeat before Bjarki's huge charging form smashed into the middle of the thick line of dark-clad enemy troops. The light shower of arrows had done little damage. 1 man killed, perhaps, another skewered in the shoulder, and these experienced troops were quick to coalesce again, closing up their ranks instinctively. But the shower of lethal shafts gave them all just enough pause for Bjarki to get his hurtling body inside the middle of the shield wall, to bullock wildly, massively, left and right, and begin laying about himself with his sword. The blade, wielded by an immensely strong, battle-crazed warrior, seemed to cut through shield, helm, and armor, flesh and bone with ease. As Bjarki shoved the Franks back with his own shield and sliced at limbs and faces with his sword, a widening bloody gap was created in the previous tight-knit line of Blackcloaks, and the rest of his warriors piled in behind him, screaming their hatred, opening up the hole that the berserker had created in the enemy shield wall and ripping the Franks' formation open. They shredded it, dismembered it, split it wide apart. In a dozen heartbeats, the shield wall was no more. Dazed Blackcloaks were reeling back on all sides, and Bjarki was still roaring and stamping, hacking and stomping, and slaughtering any man within range of his bloody sword, any man who had the courage to stand before him. His comrades were hard on his heels, howling, shoving the now terrified Franks in all directions, spears flickering out to rip away Christian lives. Tor's 4 bowmen, still 50 yards away, loosed 2 more volleys, and 2 more, after which they ran eagerly down the hill to join the fray. "Ward Bjarki Bloodhand! Ward the berserker!" Tor yelled as she ran. A group of 3 Blackcloaks on foot saw Tor and her comrades pelting towards them, shouted a challenge, and stood so as to bar their careening path. While he was still running, to Tor's astonishment, one of the bowmen plucked a shaft, knocked and loosed, and sunk it into the leading Blackcloak's neck. Tor took a heavy chop on his shield from the second man, threw the sword off its painted leather face, and buried her own in the man's belly. He made a whooshing sound, like a punctured pig's bladder, and collapsed. The third man took to his heels and ran away. Bjarki was still running. Tor saw, screaming, slathered, and dripping. It was clear the berserker was heading towards the black tent. Yes, and there, throwing open the flap and striding out, Tor recognized the tall Blackcloak captain. Bjarki saw him too, howled at him like a mad dog, changed direction, and began to bound towards the astonished enemy officer, whirling his red glistening sword in great loops as he charged. There was a thunder of hooves, and before Bjarki could get within a dozen yards of the captain of the Franks, a score of cavalry surged round from behind the huge tent and crashed straight into the berserker's massive form, bowling him over like a kicked ball of rags, the iron-shod hooves of the horses knocking him this way and that. The Blackcloak riders, thundering over his body, jabbed down with their javelins at Bjarki's rolling, jerking, thrashing body, plunging their steel points into his flesh. They reined in, turned quickly, and rode over to her brother, all over again. Tor shouted, "No!" and lost sight of the berserker in the dust cloud. A huge Blackcloak officer on foot popped up in front of Tor, and she was obliged to exchange a series of cuts with this warrior, his helmet plume nodding like a fighting cock's wattle, before an archer put a yard of ash through the man's chest from a dozen paces and ended the bout. When Tor looked again towards the black tent, she saw all her comrades swarming over the Frankish riders, leaping up at the men in their saddles, hauling them down to earth, where they savaged them with swords and knives. Others were dueling with the mounted men, lunging up at them with spears, or cowering beneath the hacking swords and pawing hooves of their trained horses. There was no sign of Bjarki at all. Where was he? Where was her big, bad wrecker brother? Tor stared about her wildly. Bjarki was gone, disappeared. Dead, no doubt at all. Trampled under the plunging hooves of the cavalry, that knowledge struck her like a kick to the heart. Bjarki's plan had failed. Her brother was dead. Part 1. 5 months earlier. Chapter 1. The Top of the World. Bjarki Bloodhand squinted against the whipping flurries of snow that constantly assaulted his eyes. He wiped a mittened hand across his brow, his face now numb with cold, and thought he saw it again. Something moving out there, on the dim horizon to his right. A dark mass shifting across the whiteness of the ice fields. In an hour or two, it would be dark again. The days pitifully short up here on this rim of the world, only a brief few hours of light at this time of year. There. Yes. Movement for sure. He stumbled forwards eagerly, his deerskin-wrapped legs punching through the snow crust and into a foot of airy powder before finding the frozen earth. A wading action more than a walk, and utterly exhausting. He had run out of food the day before, and already his belly was gnawing at the back of his spine, all his limbs feeble and jelly-like. He had been walking for many weeks now, northward, ever northwards. A pulse throbbed in his forehead, and everything ached where it was not numb. The mass grew slowly closer, and he could see at last that it was indeed what he had hoped. A stream of dun and cream animals, a herd, moving eastwards, seemingly endless, grunting softly as they moved, and figures bundled against the cold, but some sporting caps of sky blue and blood red, bold, even jaunty in the whiteness of the frozen landscape, in and among the mass of the reindeer herd, 5 or 6 of them visible now. He called out to the riders who were perched on the backs of their reindeer and drumming their heels to keep their animals moving forwards into the very teeth of the storm. But his
Sample complete. Ready to continue?